All right, hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm JR. I've got some substantial news today on the Big Ten front with conversations about unequal revenue sharing. If you've followed this channel for very long, you know where Zach and I primarily sit on this issue that we think that the Big Ten needs to do everything they can to have equal revenue sharing within the conference. However, unequal revenue sharing is something that's going to come. It's already happening in the ACC right now. When you heard, I think it was Pat Chun, the athletic director for Washington, talk a few months ago. He alluded to unequal revenue sharing coming to the conference. There's already unequal revenue sharing in the fact that if you begin coming to the conference like Washington and Oregon have, you're typically at like a half share. I think Rutgers and Maryland, either their half share just ended or it's ending here soon after this year from coming to the conference. So eventually that stuff is over. But basically, said that I might be saying the wrong name. The Washington athletic director said that when it's time for them to stop being a half share member in the Big Ten, there might continue to be unequal revenue sharing in the Big Ten, and that was, I believe, 2029, 2023, somewhere in that range. And that's about the same time that we're expecting more Big Ten teams to enter into the conference. So Ted Carter was talking about revenue sharing within the conference today and had a little bit of big news. Of course, this news is being oversighted by the Charlie Kirk stuff and everything. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that in this video, but just want to say prayers to his family. That's an awful situation. And, gun violence is a terrible, terrible thing. And I would just encourage anybody that's out there that knows somebody who has ever dealt with that or had temptations of that or anything in their life to please get them some mental health help because our nation is broken with a lot of this stuff right now, unfortunately. But anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Let's get into this revenue sharing thing and all that. So, Ohio State University President Ted Carter expects conversations about Big Ten revenue sharing model. Carter highlighted Ohio State's significant brand value, citing high TV viewership for its football games. And the final key point is that future financial self sufficiency could be challenged by rising costs related to athlete compensation for NIL. All right. So I just want to go through this article. Last time I did this, you guys seemed to kind of like it a little bit. So instead of watching a video of somebody speaking, let's just go through the article and see what it says. Ohio State University President Ted Carter left open the possibility of changes to the Big Ten Conference's school revenue sharing agreement and his own institution's approach to how its athletic department is funded. Not surprising, Ohio State fans have not been happy with the TV deal and how many noon games they have to play. But even in that scenario, that's mostly just fan fodder talk here. Ohio State has still backed some of this stuff, and they're going to name their brand and everything else. We'll get into some more of that stuff, but let's keep reading for now. During a Tuesday, September 9th interview with USA Today that also covered an array of Ohio State-specific and national higher education topics, Carter addressed questions about two long-standing features of the school's sports financial picture: roughly equal revenue sharing of Big Ten revenue among the conference's longstanding members and $0 in university or student fee money being used to support the athletic department. Interesting stuff there. Let's keep going on. Ohio State is one of the biggest brand names in college sports, and its department supports 35 NCAA teams, making it one of the most brand based. So that is significant because if you look at the SCORE Act, one of the things that Congress is trying to make happen right now is they're trying to make it so these Olympic sports don't go away. And for Ohio State, I believe them and Stanford are the two largest athletic departments. They have the most sports in their athletic department. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe those are the two largest. For Ohio State, this would be really, really difficult for them because not only would they have to support each one of these sports individually with their facilities and everything else, but they would also have to support them with athlete compensation as well, especially if you're going to have some type of Title IX stuff that requires for the women's sports to be getting compensation too, which, that's for another video. We're not going to go too deep on that, but it makes sense for Ohio State because I think while a lot of fans are upset about the noon games and stuff, this is really what Ohio State finds themselves more upset with. How many sports they have and everything, and so how many they have to fund, but they're still getting an equal check from the Big Ten as compared to other ones. Now, TV might come into play here later on, but I think this is an important distinction to make because this is where Ohio State's coming from. Again, I am not saying that I agree, I'm just explaining the situation. Carter said during the interview that Ohio State had around 325 million in athletic revenue for the 2024-2025 fiscal year, and that the department operates at a surplus. Well, that's good news. In context, Clemson and Florida State's recent disputes with the ACC has resulted in the ACC, talked about this, adopting an unbalanced revenue sharing model. A lot of this is based on TV viewership, stuff like that. Carter was asked whether he foresaw that happening in the Big Ten, given the television draws of Ohio State and Michigan. Those are consistently the two largest brands in the conference when it comes to TV viewership. All right, here's what Carter had to say. I don't want to get into that type of conversations that are happening inside the Big Ten, said Carter, who began at Ohio State in January 1st, 2024, after 4 years at the president of the University of Nebraska system. Quote, I would just tell you that we're a proud member of the Big Ten, and that's where we're going to stay. We have our own bylaws for how we do the distributions. When a new member joins the conference, they don't always come in the same share, as you know. So, that's the way our media rights deals are set up. That's how we set up for now. Okay, so he's kind of dodging the question, kind of saying like, look, we already have unequal revenue sharing because when teams come into the conference, they're not making as much as others, i.e. Maryland Rutgers, and how they're going to be making a full share here soon. And then you look at USC, UCLA. Well, actually, I don't know. They might be full. Well, I know for a fact Oregon and Washington are making unequal money right now. I'm USC and UCLA might be. I don't know that for sure. Carter was then asked what he thinks about where this goes 4 to 5 years from now as a conference. Excellent question. You look at the comments lately by some other athletic directors. Carter's the president. He's not an athletic director. But as conferences' current respective television contracts begin winding down, that's going to be huge, and that's honestly probably what's going to cause a lot of this conference realignment happening in 2029, 2023, or 2029, 2030, around that time. We don't have any answers, he replied. I will say that there's only a couple of schools that really represent the biggest brands in the Big Ten, and you can see that by the TV viewership. I mean, look at what we just went through with the Texas game, Ohio State's season opener. A 16 million, really 16.6 million people watching that game over the whole game. And it peaked at 18.6 million. It's the most watched opening game in history, third largest game ever watched in a regular season on Fox. So that's what happens when you put Ohio State brand out there. Yeah, he's coming in with the numbers, coming in hot. And, he's got a point. Ohio State does do very, very good numbers. Now, does this mean that they're going to go to more of an ACC type of model where it's like viewership is based on how much revenue sharing you get from the conference and stuff like that? I don't know, but if that's the case, like the conference has got to put an end to that. They have got to find a way to try and compensate every team fairly, whether that is putting making sure every team is on every network at least once, if every team is on the big noon kickoff or something, just to make Ohio State happy, because you just can't have this unequal revenue sharing. It's not going to work. I guess I shouldn't say it's not going to work. The other schools aren't going to be happy about it at all. Nor would I be if I was. But if you're an Ohio State fan, you want this desperately because you're agreeing with everything Ted Carter's saying. You're nodding your head and saying, "Yep, we are the biggest brand. Yep, we do bring in the biggest numbers." And so the ones that bring in the biggest numbers are the ones that you want to fund the most because they're going to continue to bring more and more and more into your conference. All right. But like I said, the Big Ten needs to figure this out in a different way because ultimately you're going to have teams that suffer and that just are not going to have as much funding as other schools. Now, that's not the worst thing in the world because there are schools right now that are making as much money as Ohio State, and not nearly as much of that money for other schools is going to their football program as it is for Ohio State. Personally, if you're making that much money, I would love to see you put it toward your football program, but that's not what every school does. Asked whether so starting up here at the top, asked whether that should translate into something different in terms of revenue sharing. Carter said, it doesn't matter what Ted Carter thinks. I think that's going to be a conversation that will be had over time. So dodging the question about what he thinks and putting it toward more of the greater conversation. Carter said Ohio State is, quote, committed to maintaining, end quote, its current number of sports and has undertaken a number of initiatives aimed to increase the revenue. Those range from the creation of a member-only club at Ohio Stadium that is scheduled to be open on non-games to new luxury suite and seating areas in the stadium to greater effort to book other events at university facilities. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Ohio State, they want to keep around their athletic programs and everything else, and it doesn't outline it in this article, but if the SCORE Act goes through, they're going to have to, right? They're gonna make sure that you don't just cut sports to try and maintain the revenue making ones, which like that makes sense to do, but it's obviously awful for these Olympic athletes and stuff like that need these other 34, 33 sports. I don't know how many are revenue making sports at Ohio State. Probably football for sure. The two basketball might be revenue sharing. The other ones, women's basketball, I don't know. Probably not. That's not me coming at women's basketball. I don't think women's basketball at Ohio State is all that big. All right. Maybe it is. All right. Don't scold me for my women's basketball takes. I don't cover women's basketball, okay? All right. It says, all of this aimed at allowing Ohio State to continue being among a small group of Division I public schools nationally whose athletic department annually reports netting zero in revenue from school or government sources or student fees. Ohio State's athletic department also annually reports transfers of money beyond operating expenses to the university's general fund. Asked whether the athletic department will be able to continue working in that fashion, Carter said, all right, this is going to be important. This is an important question. I think that will depend on what types of rules they have set up for NIL and revenue sharing, which athletes from schools that use their name, image, and likeness. All right, so this is huge. Well, let me highlight this so I know where to go back to. This is huge because Ohio State right now is going through a lot of, they want to abide by the rules, but other schools don't want to. And I think this is where some of this stuff is stemming from, that Ohio State is not happy that they're willing to abide by the revenue sharing, at least in the conference, they're willing to abide by it, but other schools are not. I personally would like to see every school follow the rules if the rules are instituted, because what's the purpose in having rules if none of them are actually going to be followed? But I get it. Other schools are looking at it and say, we've never had rules to follow. So I also understand that as well. But overall, all right, let's finish what Ted Carter had to say. I mean, that's one of the reasons we want to see those things get a little bit more under control. If those costs continue to go up and there's risks of those type of things, the department remaining financially self-sufficient, and so that's obviously something we're paying attention to. Need a parenthesis in there, probably right there in that area. But yeah, I mean, that would be my main takeaway from this, is right now Ohio State is going to flaunt it, and Ohio State is going to come out there and try to show everybody just how big they are and try to get more revenue sharing for them, because unequal revenue sharing, especially because they're looking at other schools and saying they're not playing by the same rules that we are. So if we're going to play by the rules, the only way that we're going to play by the rules is the only way we're going to have equal revenue sharing is if everybody else is playing by the rules too. Honestly, it's not that much different than what the Big Ten just did to the SEC, strong-arming them into 9 conference games, which, by the way, Big Ten, make it happen. All right, 1 required out-of-conference P4 opponent for every team. Make it happen. All right, stop Stop, farting around with this. But I think this is probably where a lot of that is stemming from. Not all of it. There's the Olympic sports and stuff like that. But my main takeaway is that Ohio State's not happy right now that they are trying to play by the rules with this revenue sharing stuff and others are not. And this is not uncommon. You listen to Ross Bjork and other people talk about this, and there's obvious frustration from them on this other stuff as well. I personally see both sides of it. I see where schools, let's just point them out. The teams that people think are doing this, we don't know for sure, but the teams that we think are doing this are like USC and Michigan, right? And of course, if it is Michigan, it just adds to the rivalry and them going back and forth with one another. But I see why those two teams, if not more teams, are doing this, because the rules have never really been enforced. And you can look at the House settlement and everything and say, well, who's going to say this is actually going to go through with it? Because Ohio State's kind of going out on a limb here, saying we're going to follow the $20 million revenue sharing cap, but other schools are not going to follow it because they're going to say, well, what other schools are going to follow this? And they want to try and remain out there and remain above things. To me, the people I'm looking at, one, is the NCAA, because they're not doing anything. They had to go through all this stuff. And two, get your punishments figured out. The House settlement has still not figured out a lot of their punishments and stuff like that, and they've not figured out a way to put this into recruiting. That's, to me, what needs to be figured out more than anything else, is actually punishing these schools, so that way schools like USC and Michigan that aren't sure if everybody's going to follow it can look at other schools and say, okay, they're going to make us follow it. And so that way everybody else falls in line too. It's admirable for Ohio State to try and say, yeah, we're going to go out here and follow stuff, but it does make it difficult on them for paying their NIL to other players if they're not able to offer as much as some other teams are, because they're not, they're not following the cap like the rural state, which they don't really have to, because there's no punishments for it. There's rules, but there's no punishment. You can tell your kid, eat your chicken nuggets, but they don't eat the chicken nuggets, and you just throw your hands up in the air and say, oh shucks. Like, who are you gonna blame? The kid for not eating the chicken nuggets, or the parent who doesn't put any type of punishments in place to actually make it worthwhile for the kid to do it? In this situation, I blame the CSC and the NCAA a whole lot more than I do Michigan and USC. And if this is in fact what Ted Carter is saying, that he wants the rules to actually be enforced, I'm totally with him. Not with him on the unequal revenue sharing thing. I think that's going to really hurt the conference to do that. It's going to be really good for Ohio State. Don't get me wrong. They're going to make a lot of money. But when you look at it for the entire conference, I'd like to see a competitive conference, not just teams that are making a fifth of what Ohio State is making, trying to go up against them and play them. But if you're an Ohio State fan, you don't care about that. you want as much funding as possible. All right. The goal, he said, so I'm down here now. I'll highlight it so you guys can follow along. Looks like this is the last part of the article. Yeah. The goal, he said, is the department to remain self-sufficient. At some point, there's only so many things you can do to generate additional revenue, he said. ... So again, you've got to be able to think a little differently. We're the top selling brand for apparel. We're a proud member of using Nike. That's a relationship that really matters to us. And so, again, you've got to look at everything that can help generate revenue, and we're still looking at other ways to help offset these costs. I don't think he brought up Nike there by accident. Ohio State could possibly go away from Nike if they get some type of deal like what Penn State got from Adidas, right? I don't think Penn State wanted to go away from Nike, but Adidas made a deal with them. From everything it sounds like, I don't have all the facts on that, but from what it sounds like, Adidas made a deal with Penn State to help get their NIL and stuff like that up, so that way they could pay more players. Genius idea from Penn State, but it does kind of suck because, let's be honest, Nike is just better apparel than Adidas does. Better uniforms, better all kinds of stuff. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on all this stuff. If do you agree with Ted Carter? You agree with what I'm saying? Do you think there's another aspect of this that I'm missing? What are your thoughts? Do you think unequal revenue sharing is going to be coming to the conference like me and Zach do? Very curious on what you all think. Thank you so much for watching this video. Prayers for Charlie Kirk and his family. more prayers for Charlie Kirk's family right now and for our nation. Just if somebody needs help, get them help. If they got something going on mentally, mental illness wise, just advocate for people to get help, because right now, obviously, Charlie Kirk's family, they need a lot of prayers, but our nation right now, just people need help, and do everything you can to do that. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. Have a good one.